Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse podcast, and this episode, it's just me. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I think is going to be happening in the warehouse technology space in 2026. But first, I want to thank you so much for listening to the New Warehouse podcast and supporting us in 2025. And I hope you will continue to do so in 2026 as well. We very much appreciate you being a part of the New Warehouse community, audience, and family. And we love to discover and be curious along with you around these technologies that are happening in the warehouse industry, and also have those conversations to kind of dig in and think about what is possible inside our four walls and what can we do with our operations. So really appreciate you tuning in. And as we look back on 2025, we had a lot of conversations, as we always do, tons of conversations, actually, now that I think back on it. But one thing for sure that dominated kind of the technology landscape in warehousing was AI, right? And I think that was for everybody within the business landscape, whether it was in warehousing or different parts of industry or just our general day-to-day, everyday lives, right? But when we look at AI and how it was applied within the warehouse in 2025, I think, what stood out to me were some of the things that were focused more on the optimization and creating better efficiency within the warehouse itself. So in other words, AI that wasn't essentially visible to the end user, but was more of like a layer to improve their day-to-day and help efficiency gains in the overall operation. And they may feel it from, reduced footsteps, better pick path and things like that, but not necessarily interacting with it in that sense, right? So, I mean, two call outs for sure are what Shapiro did with their AI picking. There was a lot of talk about that and a lot of efficiency gains, I think, from their customers that they saw. And then also the launch of Lully as well, which was focused on warehouse orchestration, doing some of the same things as well, creating better pick paths, creating better kind of orchestration around what can actually be put on that pick card, and utilizing that where, not necessarily the end user knows that this is going on, right? They may be aware that there's some new technology there, but they're not having to interact, right, as the picker or the warehouse worker and be leveraging something different to do that. So no necessarily change from a technology use perspective on their side or that user experience, but still seeing the benefits of that. And I think in some cases too, it kind of skewed the idea of, do we really need robots, right? Where we're able to utilize this AI, we can optimize further to be able to do some of these things. And are we really needing to look at robots or AMRs for picking in particular right now? So I think that was one thing, certainly from 2025, that stood out to me a bit. And then I think that, overall, and this has been certainly a larger trend over the past couple of years and has always been important, but I think software is certainly becoming a differentiating factor when it comes to technology solutions overall, right? Especially in automation and the robotics landscape. The software that's powering that automation or robotics, which is essentially hardware, right, in itself, is really what's making the difference there, right? Like, how is that going to interact with my existing systems? How is it going to interact with additional hardware that I have? How is that all going to come together? And I think that software, not only being able to enable these different solutions to come together and be possible, I think has become more important than ever, and has been a huge differentiating factor for solution providers, whether they are the software provider themselves or they are providing a hardware that needs that software to power it. So I think that was one thing too as well that stood out to me. And then I think overall, the market, right, has become just so much more aware of technology and exploring just what is possible in the warehouse landscape. And a lot of that is because we're seeing, rapid iterations of things due to the influx of AI technology and the advancement of AI technology for startups to be able to explore that. But I think the market from an end user perspective, an operator perspective, shipper perspective, is that they are really geared towards what technologies can I use and what should I be looking at. Over the last year, I'll say I've received more questions from warehouse operators about what automation, what software, what robotics, what overall technologies should I be looking at, and what should be on my radar? Should I be exploring anything differently? And this is from all sizes, right? People that have, small one building 3PLs up to, multiple operations, 10, 20 different locations. They're all wondering what is possible, right? What can I do? What can I figure out? How can I be more efficient? How can I be optimized more? And how can I look at these technologies? And I think they're educating themselves more. And obviously there's an abundance of solutions on the market, to say the least. And I think trying to navigate that and really doing some research is top of mind for a lot of these people. But with that being said, I think, looking at that technology, I think we've proven out too as well that, the fundamentals still matter in the warehouse, right? Without having the warehouse in order, without having data clean, without the processes dialed in, right? It's hard to get full benefits of some of these solutions, right? And as companies, a lot of the older companies that are now saying like, okay, let's invest in some technology, let's get up to speed here to be more competitive, or maybe, we're switching from just a B2B focus to more of an omni-channel, D2C, e-commerce focus as well, adding that into the mix. Those fundamentals are critical to get in order. And I think we're seeing now at a point where a lot of these technologies have been implemented. We've had, projects, unfortunately, that have not panned out, have not yielded the benefits that they should have. And we've had enough years of experience of doing these types of things and seeing these solutions out in the wild to be able to have some of these use cases now where they didn't pan out, right? And why is that, right? A lot of times it's because those fundamentals were not necessarily in order before we do that. So from a solution provider's perspective, I think the more SMBs that start to get more serious about looking at these advanced technologies and, wanting to explore these and thinking they're viable for them, right? The more steps that are going to go into making these fundamentals even more important. And I think solution providers need to be able to be prepared to solve that, for one, and then enable in an easy way for these companies to be able to solve that internally as well, to make sure that they can do that, right? Or if it's going to be, a very difficult mountain to climb just to get that foundation set to put these technologies, sometimes it's going to probably delay their action to be able to bring these technologies in. So I think that, those fundamentals are core in warehousing always, right? And I think they're even more core because as we bring in more AI, more software, more robotics, more automation, right? The fundamentals are going to be core to be able to drive those to their fullest extent and get the most out of them as possible, because we want ROI, right? At the end of the day, if we invest in a technology, we want it to pay off and see the benefits from that, and to maximize those, right? Our fundamentals, our house needs to be in order to be able to do that. So those were some of my kind of key takeaways from 2025. Obviously there was a ton that happened, right? As there is every year. But those are some of the things that stood out to me as kind of overall trends or messages or whatever you want to call them for last year. But looking forward now into 2026, I think that I mentioned from 2025 perspective, I think what stood out from an AI effectiveness and implementation perspective was more on the sort of invisible layer, right, for operators to put in and create better optimization, better efficiency. But I think from an AI perspective, what we'll see in 2026 is that it will become more interactive for the warehouse user. Right. So, that can be on the floor lead. It can be a supervisor. It could be someone, working on the manual day-to-day activities like picking, packing, et cetera, in the warehouse. And I think, we've seen, ChatWMS, call those guys out. They've been on the podcast before as well. But they're taking that approach, right, to interact with that WMS, much like you would interact with ChatGPT or Gemini or another LLM platform to be able to extract data and do different types of things. So I think we're going to see more of that. And I think, that will be very interesting to see how that rolls out. And I think the use cases on how people will utilize that. And I think, regular ChatGPT and Gemini are going to be utilized for various tasks, right, on that floor level as well. We had a great conversation with Graham Hillhouse from El Famoso, and he talked about how he's essentially enabled all employees within his 3PL, including people that work directly on the floor, to leverage and be able to utilize Gemini through Google Workspace by tapping into their SOPs, standard work, making their HR processes better, making their interactions with employees better too as well, and kind of having that history too of interaction as well. So I think we'll see more of that leveraged, and the warehouse user will be brought more into that. How can we do that? How can we look at things a little better? I forget how to do this certain process. I can pull it up real quick in a natural way through an LLM or something like that. So I think we'll see more of that interaction, direct interaction from the warehouse end user with AI this year. And I think where it's real critical, and what I've been super excited about for the possibilities of AI is just empowering the leadership within the warehouse to be able to have better access to data and be able to crunch that better and get more decisions made in a more timely manner versus kind of doing that analysis and I guess autopsy in a sense of like what went wrong and how can we improve like a week later from the data, right? Like be able to do this more in real time and be more preventative on a lot of those things. So that's kind of what I see from an AI perspective, that warehouse user will be more interactive with it in 2026. And I think the big thing that's standing out to me, and the one thing I think is going to be absolutely huge, just certainly got a lot of traction in 2025, I think, and is now kind of boiling up to where it's really going to start to penetrate into the market, is essentially this wave of vision technology, right? And that's vision technology from computer vision, machine vision perspective, and also some wearable vision technology as well. I think that will dominate the landscape of kind of what I would call accessible warehouse technology for 2026. So, we traditionally have captured all of our data within the warehouse, through scanners, right? RF scanners and barcodes and things of that nature. I don't think the barcode will go anywhere. We're certainly seeing more influx of some RFID things as well for tracking, but the barcode I think is here to stay for many years still. But I think the vision technology is going to take that data capture to the next level, right? And interesting kind of discussion on LinkedIn a couple of days ago before recording this about lack of data being captured or getting more data right from the workflows and the processes that we're doing in the warehouse. And there was some interesting kind of contrast there around, the idea of the benefits of getting more data right at the time of receiving a package or picking or putting away a box or a pallet, etc., and the kind of time it takes to be able to do that, right? So if you're scanning multiple times, every time you're scanning, obviously those seconds added to your process. So what I think is exciting about this vision technology is that there's companies out there that are looking at this and enabling ways to constantly be capturing this type of data without the worker or the user themselves actually having to do another action, right? So going about their kind of typical cadence, and then as things are passing through and those cameras are capturing the data, the box, the barcodes, anything that it's recognizing or has been trained to recognize in that scenario, capturing that data and then being able to utilize that for further analysis and also identifying additional things. So I think that, this will be a really kind of accessible way for businesses and warehouse operations to kind of level up their data capture and the data that's available to them, which will build an incredible foundation for future technologies that can expand upon that. But I think that is going to become very accessible and will be something that a lot of companies will be looking at. How can they leverage that? And some of the companies I think to keep an eye on around that certainly is Retina Robotics, which of course I'm biased. I'm advisor for them, but I think what they're building is really interesting, or else I wouldn't have agreed to be an advisor for them. But they're utilizing cameras to capture this data as well around inventory tracking and making it, which I think is key, making it in a very accessible type of package that can go on, meaning a apparatus that can go onto any type of equipment that's moving throughout the warehouse. Also seeing some really interesting things from Peak Technologies, or just visited recently, around cameras and machine vision that they're leveraging from Zebra Technologies. And some of the technology there, and being able to capture at multiple different points within the movement of material through your operation. Arvist as well, certainly one that's been doing it for a while. Started on the safety side, but is now transitioned to some of the quality side as well, which I think is going to be a huge thing from a vision perspective, because we have a ton of packages going through all the time, and how do we see that from a human eye? We need to recognize, like, are there damages, is there moisture potentially, and all different types of things. Could be at the case level, the each level, could be the pallet itself, right? Is the pallet damaged itself? And I'm sending that out to a Costco or a Walmart, and if they open that door and that pallet's damaged, well, that's going to cost me a lot of money, right? They're going to send it back. They're going to fine me, probably lots of different things on the compliance side there. So those are a couple to look out for. I also think that, when we talk about computer vision, certainly, one of the applications is from a drone perspective that we've seen, right? And I think, drones, I don't know if I'm long-term on the drones. I think there's a fit for them in certain arenas, but I think, we're seeing where, in 2025, like Nokia or Cientis, right, they kind of closed up shop on their drones as they were exploring that. Gather has obviously been one of the leaders in this space, but they've also expanded into an additional layer of adding cameras to forklifts to be able to capture additional data as well. So I think that, the cameras are expanding, and what the data can pull from that is as well. And I think, as we see more accessibility and for the technology to capture at a faster rate and from different angles and different use cases, that we're going to see that, there may be some interesting different type of vehicles to put those cameras on, and where we can capture that in existing workflows already. So very interested to see what happens there. And from a wearable perspective as well, right? If you haven't seen, did a little demo with Vuzix of their M400, which actually from prior demo, trying a different provider's wearable vision thing as well, was pretty impressed with how it captured, how quickly it moved, pairing the kind of vision technology with voice to be able to give it commands. And as a glasses wearer, I was actually very impressed with how it was not really uncomfortable to put over top of my glasses. I think there's some challenges there, definitely from a wearable perspective, especially for those that don't wear glasses normally. It's going to be a very different feeling, something to get used to there. And for those that do wear glasses, what happens there. I think, from a vision perspective, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of things that can happen. I know at the Shapiro AI and Logistics, Aaron Rubin teased a little bit on what they're working on over there from a vision perspective too, and similar to what I saw on an Amazon tour late in 2025 as well, where just tracking hand movement as a confirmation for a pick or a put without having to scan, right? Which is a huge opportunity for improvement, I think. So very exciting there for sure. And I categorize that as what I call an accessible warehouse technology, right? Which I think is becoming more and more important, right? I mentioned from 2025, one of the takeaways was certainly that, people across the market as a whole are more invested invested in researching and looking and developing the knowledge on the technologies that are out there, right? So as we see, the technology landscape start to penetrate further down market, right, for the small and mid-market operations, I think more focus on options for brownfield settings is going to be a huge thing, right? We've seen certainly a number of startups kind of pop up in the last year or two as well that are looking at utilizing existing space, the racking that's already there, and other resources that already exist. So I think that is going to become an even greater trend to see how can we do more with what we already have. And I think that becomes super important for those small and medium-sized businesses because, they want to focus on being less disruptive. They want lower investment for sure. And some of them, can't even make that huge investment, right? And they can't stop shipping is one other thing, right? They can't shut down operations. So how can we implement something with the operation still happening? And we can't go out and get a whole nother building and run this operation while we're trying to stand up that building and do all that and make that transition, right? So how do we bring that in and how do we do something with what we already have existing? So companies that we talked to Cartesian Kinetics, we talked to Simple Automation and using existing racking, putting shuttle systems in place to do that. Just saw a video of the Rubric, which I think is kind of looking at that brownfield and case picking in particular from what I could see from the video, and definitely interested in learning more about that as well. But I think those kind of less disruptive, lower investment from an overall holistic and resource perspective solutions are certainly going to start to trend up more because I think, as we increase the technology gets better. We don't necessarily always need to go and get a fresh slate to be able to do that. And I think people don't always want to do that, right? They like the building they're at, they like the location they're in, and they just want to improve a little bit and optimize a little more. So how do we bring stuff in to be able to do that? The other thing for 2026 that I'm looking at and have been looking at, if you're a longtime listener of the podcast, it gets me very excited, is automated truck unloading, and certainly here to stay, thankfully, because that is like the worst job in the warehouse, I say personally. I think it's incredibly taxing manually, and in my experience, one of the highest turnover spots or departments in the operation. But we just saw that UPS did a purchase of 400 robots from Pickle Robotics for automated unloading and loading of the containers, which is huge, certainly. And congratulations to Pickle on that for sure. And then DHL, obviously with ongoing relationship with Boston Dynamics, utilizing Stretch to do some of that unloading. But, the further investment from larger players into this certainly allows for, this technology to be more viable, more proven, and then ultimately more cost effective for a lot of operations. And I think I haven't necessarily met anyone that loves to unload a floor loaded container. So I think everyone would be kind of clamoring to figure out how to solve that. And I think, we're getting closer and closer. It's very interesting market because there's a lot of different kind of form factors and approaches to the way that some of these companies have come up with solutions for that. And I think it'll be interesting to see who ultimately becomes the dominant players there. Obviously, big vote of confidence from UPS by going with Pickle, and DHL with Boston Dynamics and Stretch being kind of one of the first movers in this arena of the warehouse. But I also think there's an interesting question to ask there. And, from the long term, right, we've obviously 2025 was the year of tariffs, right? And there's a lot of impact on the supply chain from that. And, one of the goals of tariffs and being able to utilize them is to try and bring more manufacturing back domestically in the U.S. And if that happens over time for the long term, I do wonder, does that result in less floor loaded containers, right? And if there's less floor loaded containers moving about and coming into these operations, does that kind of alter the form factor that becomes more in demand around these unloading robots. So that's something that remains to be seen, and obviously that's very long term impact if we see a shift there. But I'd be curious to see that, and obviously some great solutions around palletized unloading and loading as well, like Slip Robotics, certainly doing some great things there too. So I think that, when we look at those things, it all kind of leads to my last kind of outlook for 2026 and what I think is going to be really important for a lot of operations, which is we need to start defining what the future warehouse worker looks like, the human aspect, right, of our operations. I don't think that we are anywhere near getting to truly kind of viable, lights out, dark warehouse. I think that it has to be a very, very specific use case to be able to do that. I think there's still a lot of, as the consumers, we still drive a lot of need for customization and high touch types of activities and processes. So the warehouse worker is going to, still remain in there. But what does the future warehouse worker look like? As we look at these technologies coming in, and asked this a couple times on the podcast in 2025 to people of, right now the entry-level worker for a warehouse is a material handler, right? Somebody that comes in, they move stuff around. Maybe they're a picker, maybe they're unloading containers like we just talked about, doing that type of work. And then they can work their way up to other things and other tasks that require a little more thinking and things of that nature. But, does the material handler ultimately disappear, right? Because if we look at a lot of this automation, a lot of this robotics, especially, a lot of focus is on moving material from point A to point B, right? Retrieving material and bringing material to a worker to be able to do the more high touch activity. So where does that warehouse worker start to enter the operation, right? What does that future entry level position look like? And I think that kind of yet remains to be defined. I think it will be someone that is certainly able to work with some of these technologies that we've discussed today and have been discussing on the podcast for some time. And how do we upskill these workers to be able to work with them and our existing workers too as well? I think one thing that's very interesting is we haven't quite had a story or heard where a company has brought in a bunch of robotics or automation and it resulted in like the immediate impact of cutting employees, right? Where it's been more of, well, it's just reduced kind of the hiring in the future, essentially. So keeping those existing workers, how do we upskill them to be able to work with these technologies that we're bringing into our operations, and how do we do that? So I think that, there's a couple stakeholders involved here with that. One is certainly the operations themselves, and how do they, take their existing employees and how do they give them the skills to work with newer technologies and figure out how to maximize as well the utilization of them. And then one is certainly on the solution providers, right? How do we, make sure that our solution comes in, it's easy enough to adopt, easy enough to get to the level of usability, and be able to train easily to have these people comfortable with it and be able to leverage it for maximum utilization as well. And then I think we also need to see some stuff from like government as well, right? Like how do we invest in programs to, have these employees or have these citizens essentially, right, come in from high school or whatever? How do we bring this into, trade schools and things like that to have people be more versed on this, right? Because we're not going to have somebody that goes to school for engineering and all these things come to work as a robotic supervisor, right? It's just not going to work out that way. So how do we, have somebody that maybe traditionally would have gone and become like a forklift operator? How do we give them a different set of skills to now be comfortable to operate and manage a set of robotic forklifts versus actually operate the forklift themselves? So I think there's a couple different ways and things that need to lift that up to make sure that we can handle all of these technologies from a usability perspective. So it'd be interesting to see that. And I think, companies are going to be more focused on defining that and what does that look like, not only for my existing employees, but also for any new hires that I will have in the future. So would love to hear your thoughts on that, and would love to hear your thoughts too on what you think the entry level warehouse worker of the future looks like. I think there's some very interesting discussion around that, and that can be, within a couple years, could be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. What does that even look like? And I think that'll get defined over time, but I think we need to start looking at that and starting to define what needs to happen to be able to enable the workforce to leverage and work with these technologies to the best of their ability and maximize that utilization overall. So that's kind of my thoughts on a little bit of what happened in 2025, but also some of the things that I'm looking at and are kind of top of mind for me for 2026. So I would love to hear your thoughts and what you think for 2026. If you want to send me a message or drop a comment if you're watching this on YouTube or wherever, and feel free to let us know. What do you think? So that is kind of the warehouse landscape, but the new warehouse, what's happening in 2026 for the new warehouse podcast, and I guess we can call ourselves a media company too as well at this point, as we're doing many other things besides the podcast. And if you're listening to this on the audio podcast and you're not subscribe to us on YouTube or following us on LinkedIn, make sure you do that to get the new warehouse experience. But we shifted our focus a little bit to make a concerted effort in kind of the last part of 2025 to get a 50-50 perspective on the market, both from the end user and shipper side and the solution provider side. So we're going to continue to invest and be very intentional about getting that kind of 50-50 split, making sure that we're getting a good amount of shippers and operators that are using these solutions every day on a daily basis and moving material on a daily basis onto the podcast to balance that out with the solution providers that we're also highlighting and helping to create awareness for you on what is possible and what is available in the market. So if you are a shipper or an operator and you want to come on the podcast in 2026, certainly reach out and let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn and send me a message there. And the other big initiative for 2026 is how do we bring the community together more around warehouse technology, right? I took some time and thought about, what is the ethos of the new warehouse and where does it kind of come from? And it comes from initially my curiosity of what can I do within my operation, within my warehouse back in 2018, right? So the curiosity of exploring what is possible within the four walls is kind of how I guess I encapsulate the podcast and the new warehouse ecosystem in one line, essentially. And I think there are many other out there that are curious, as we talked about earlier in this episode, on what is possible within the four walls. What can they do? And there's more and more that is becoming an option to do certain things and improve and be better and create additional opportunities for your business from the warehouse and distribution perspective. So we'll be focused on creating community around that, and there'll be more announced about that soon. But that is certainly a huge focus for us in 2026. How do we bring people together to be able to discuss some of these things, create additional, deeper awareness and more intimate experiences to be able to see some of these things that are actually happening, so you can evaluate whether or not it's possible to do it within your four walls, and so you don't get left behind either, right? Because we want to remain competitive. We want to do the best we can do for our operations, our business, and the employees that work within them and create better experiences for them. So in addition to that, we'll be doing more events as well to help bring the community together, give more opportunities for you to talk to your peers and be able to interact with them So we'll be continuing to do the Warehousing After Dark series in collaboration with Supply Chainy and Supply Chain Social Club, which, if you're not familiar, is a virtual networking event happening on a monthly basis, and we'll be announcing the dates for 2026 very soon, and we'll have a couple in-person sessions of those as well. But I'm also working on an additional event series focused specifically on warehouse innovation that we will be announcing very soon. And I think that's going to be very exciting for some of you. So really excited about what we have in store for 2026, and absolutely incredibly grateful and thankful for all of you for tuning into the new warehouse over the last almost 7 years now, and making this such a possible thing, and being able to help everyone out there and really increase the awareness on what is possible within your four walls. So for everything The New Warehouse, make sure you're subscribed to us on YouTube at The New Warehouse, and anything else, check out thenewwarehouse.com. I'm Kevin Lawton, and if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, make sure you reach out, let me know what's on your mind for 2026 in the warehouse technology landscape. Thank you once again.